Mic check. Cool. Nice. Success for a fourth time now. Alright, hello and welcome to another video in this mini-series I have going now. It's, I think, number 4, depends on which order I edit these in, but I'm gonna assume this is gonna be number 4. And so, yeah, the series is mostly me putting some information out there, using my cybersecurity book as a baseline to share this information. So the book is called Life Cybersecurity, How Program Building Actually Works. If you want to grab a copy of it, I'm gonna have some links all over the place. But besides just talking about my book, I'm here to share the approach of my book. So rather to give a broad view of the system for those in a hurry who want to take the lessons. And if you're interested in more details, working examples, really learning how to do this stuff, you can then grab a copy of my book. So in this video, what are the discussion points? So I have 2 exactly. I want to talk about how the golden toolbox is not the only thing in the book, and rather there are 2 other sections. Well, they are the 2 discussion points, spoiler alert. But the first discussion point is about the second section of the book, which is titled Gluing Something Together. And again, this crafts analogy where you don't necessarily want to build something super complicated or super by the book. You want to expedite the process in some places. I'm going to talk about when that could be applicable and how to do it in a controlled fashion so it's not complete chaos, which is what we're trying to avoid really with these systematic discussions. The second discussion point is about section 3 of the book, which is titled Explore the Workshop, or Exploring the Workshop. Let me double check that real quick. Explore the Workshop, confirmed. So yeah, explores the workshop, which is again this crafts analogy, but talking about satellite concepts inside cybersecurity. Still terminology that applies in the field, but not necessarily things that everyone knows. So things that apply in cybersecurity, terminology that is in the field, explaining the usefulness of concepts, where they apply, so that you can just kind of seamlessly plug yourself into those discussions without having to be like, oh, I'll check back to you later on that. After learning what the concept is. So then you can just join the discussion, and when someone mentions something, you can just know what it is and know what to recommend about it kind of automatically. And yeah, there's a lot of frowning upon this memory retention kind of stuff. Oh, we can just find that on Google, on ChatGPT, whatever. Yeah, I agree, but when you're having a live discussion and you kind of need to contribute, it serves well to have these concepts ready, at least know what the context is, and then you can recommend the correct things and not like deviate too much into cybersecurity jargon, but rather in your head you know the jargon, in your speech you can just translate that into day-to-day language because you know the concept super well. So having said that, let's get started. So yeah, the golden toolbox is not everything in this book. There are 2 other sections, as I mentioned. The first section is the golden toolbox. The second section is titled Gluing Something Together. Now, what do I mean by this? I mean, there's a term in general English slang, I guess. It's called bodging. I explain how I learned about this term in the book, so there's a little story behind that, which I'm not going to get into right now. But yeah, there's a little interesting story. But the term really is about kind of through experience putting things together that work, even though they're not built by the book, even though they're not like exactly placing the junctures where it's recommended. So an experience-based approach to build things, and you would know that they work because you know where to take the shortcuts systematically and intelligently. So I'm giving recommendations here on where shortcuts are possible in the golden toolbox to transform it to something faster. But before I say where they're possible, I'm telling you why you should consider them, if at all. So which situations are they applicable in, and even I would argue they shouldn't be feasible outside those situations. So if you don't have one of those situations, then don't even consider taking shortcuts. That's my recommendation here. So apply with caution, basically. That's what I'm trying to say. So the first paragraph of the first chapter in this section is titled Why You Should Bodge. And it's a very brief paragraph on purpose because the universe of possibilities where this is a good decision is really small. And I want to highlight that. Like, you're almost always better off doing things systematically, except in a very small percentage of situations. And quite simply, I put them under one umbrella. You just can't do better in the current situation you're in. Now, what that means can be many different things, which I, again, talk about in the book. But generally speaking, it really has to be impossible to do better with a long-term approach. Specifically, you have to be tackling risks that are so high when you need like really fast action, right? So this is kind of the argument for bodging a little bit, or for gluing stuff together. So one example of this could be you really have no support in your current situation, or you have a management team with a laissez-faire attitude, which is a French term for like, or sometimes I hear it pronounced in English as laissez-faire, which is always a pet peeve of mine, but never mind, as a French speaker, it's a pet peeve of mine. But never mind, laissez-faire approach meaning like, we don't care, just tell us what to do, and we're gonna do it if it's important. And it's always a little bit hard to communicate when someone is not willing to play ball with you, not willing to think with you about, again, specifically risks and risk management. So when an organization shows unwillingness to play ball in this way, or to be more specific, a management team is not cooperating with you and say, well, let's sit down, let's talk about risk, let's do some ideation together and write down some scenarios and think about the calculations and stuff like that. They're unwilling or too busy, or whatever the excuse I might argue might be, or maybe they don't feel comfortable engaging in those deeply, I don't want to say technical, but field specific discussions. That's okay. You can still make something out of nothing. This is what I'm arguing in this section. So that's one possibility. Another possibility is you are faced with a situation where action is the best thing you can do right now. For example, the aftermath of a breach, or some kind of situation where immediate action is needed. That's when bodging is applicable. It's a possibility, it's a viable option, let me put it that way. Another scenario where I think bodging is a viable option is when the environment is so complex and you have a leadership role in this environment, but your leadership is not of a global scale that covers the whole environment where this complexity is contained. For example, you have regional teams and you're a regional leader but not a global leader, for example, for cybersecurity, I mean. Or perhaps you have a loosely federated set of entities like a holding company and affiliates, for example. That's another scenario where this is applicable. So you can do like global scale risk assessments, but you still want to proceed, or you don't have visibility over the global assets, but you have visibility over your scope. So there you can maybe advise at a global scale to do some bodging, even if you're doing things by the book at your local scale, let's put it like that. So in your department, you do the golden toolbox, but then to link stuff to other organizations, you're like, let's bodge. Let's just say, well, spoiler alert, I'm going to get into some tools that you can use here. Let's just use some gluing stuff together at a global scale, but at the local scale, we do things right. So that's a possibility. It's a viable option. Again, not my recommended option. Hopefully, the person gluing you all together at the global level would know better than just to use glue, and would use the systematic toolbox, which is the golden toolbox. And that is generally like a CISO position. So hopefully your CISO knows this stuff, but if they don't, you can suggest that. You can say, okay, we're going to do things right here. You can take this, apply it as a lesson globally. If you don't want to, here's a shortcut we can take and just agree on some controls, which is, again, the goal of doing cybersecurity. So we set up the premise of why and when we can bodge. Let's say how we can bodge a little bit right now. So how we can glue some stuff together. Number one, you can proceed without the formal risk assessment. And yes, I know, I am the number one advocate of risk assessments and doing risk management the right way. And here I am telling you to take shortcuts. Well, yeah, sometimes you're faced with an organization, again, for all the reasons I mentioned before. Maybe management team's not playing this ping pong with you, or being super disengaged and, Drake memeing cybersecurity a little bit. That's a possibility. It's a real one. I've witnessed it over and over and over again. It happens. Or maybe it's just that the environment is so complex, as we mentioned before. Whatever the case might be, how can you forego risk management if it's just not really risk management in general, but rather like a formal risk assessment specifically? How can you just skip that step, kind of, or expedite it a little bit? So you can have a quick formula on paper where you do risk assessment without diving into cost and stuff, like really detailed calculations. And you can say, okay, we're just going to say these are the highest risks for us based on experience, so experience-based decision making for risks. And we're going to say, okay, we're going to treat those risks, and then you can just go ahead, choose from a set of controls that is known in the industry at large. There's a bunch of examples that I give in the book. They're not a secret. There's ISO 27001, there's CIS controls, etc., etc. There's a lot of stuff that you can draw from. So yeah, to put it in other terms, you're just going through a known set of controls and picking and choosing, saying applicable, not applicable, how, experience-based decisions, and some knowledge of the risk landscape without going through a formal risk assessment. In situations where this is the best you can do, how can you get it done? Like, I give a practical example in the book, but let me give a very brief introduction. You look at controls recommended by a framework from the field. Let's say the NIST cybersecurity framework, or CIS controls, or whatever the case might be. ISO is a viable option, although ISO is a bit harder to interpret given the super vague international nature of the language in the standard, but never mind. Let's say we look at one of the Annex A controls, or again, NIST or CIS. What do? You use your experience, that's step one, to translate this control described in a vague generic language and project it to the assets you have. So asset management is super important here. You still have to do it really well. That's step one, interpreting. What does it mean to our specific assets or technologies that we use, etc. Step number two, you have to make a decision. Okay, is this worth it for me? Experience-based again, so you have to think, oh, have I encountered some big problems in my experience where this specific scenario was exploited? And then you say, all right, well, yes or no, or maybe partially, we're going to do some stuff that the control recommends and not do other stuff. And third, you quickly evaluate cost versus, again, the landscape of assets. So don't let the cost of securing an asset exceed the value of the asset itself. So let's give a quick example, just experience-based. Let's say, penetration tests, for example. An engagement costs usually somewhere in the vicinity of $10,000. A little bit less, a little bit more, depending on optional packages and stuff like that, or again, also depending on the vendor, obviously, or where the vendor is located. That's a big factor in cost as well. So yeah, let's say the pen test costs $10,000, and your scope of the pen test is some kind of asset that doesn't cost $10,000. For example, an office network that has internal assets that you don't really use, or maybe you work as a distributed workforce, or maybe you work in the cloud, or etc., etc. So is it worth spending the $10,000 to pen test assets that cost maybe $2,000? So that's an obvious example of, this is silly, let's not do it. The control is not applicable, right? So experience-based stuff, knowing these things can help you kind of expedite the process here and there. I give many other practical examples of what you can expedite. I'm not going to go into them all, but I'm giving some advice about outsourcing, vendor management, consultants, people who can help you expedite these things and forego some of the steps in the formula called the golden toolbox again. So yeah, there's a lot to learn, and I'm going to follow the same tradition I've done for a couple of videos now. Tradition is a strong term maybe. But anyway, I'm going to read a little passage from the book, and I think this is relevant to the fear factor that exists in security. Oh, there's a lot of stuff to learn. How do I learn all this? And I think it's useful. So let's just read a little snippet. So this is from a paragraph called When to Budge, in the same chapter that I'm mentioning is chapter 6 in the book. The chapter title is Why, When, and What to Budge, and it's from the section Glue Something Together. So here we go. First, it might be advisable to budge if you're in a structure where risk management is complicated and results are needed quickly. For example, if you're in a multinational organization but you're in charge of cybersecurity for a department or local entity. Another example would be a case where you are kickstarting a cybersecurity program for a startup. When it's a complete greenfield across the board, it might be worth starting small. Of course, it can be equally, if not even more beneficial, to do things cleanly from the start with a golden toolbox tailored to this startup. But it might also be beneficial to protect things fast. This hinges on a lot of factors such as the technical level of your counterparts, the leadership's philosophy, the go-to-market time pressure, and more. In short, you will always have to make some judgment calls when it comes to budging, and the more you study part 1 of this book and get to know the golden toolbox, the more competently you will be able to make those judgment calls. So yeah, that's a very important point. Knowing the golden toolbox is key to make shortcuts very intelligently. So the better you know this by the book approach, the deeper your expertise is, the better you will be at judgment calls and shortcuts and expedited approaches, which is kind of counterintuitive, I guess. But yeah, the better you know, the better you can deviate from the normal approach and still do things really well and intelligently. That's the point of the passage. So this section is deviating from the first two. The first two are really about the golden toolbox. The first one is about by the book golden toolbox, and even the second one is still talking about the golden toolbox, but how to kind of be non-standard with the approach to the golden toolbox and maybe deviate from the really detailed approaches of the by the book approach. So section 3 is then just a complete deviation from the first two, and we're saying, okay, there are hundreds of satellite concepts that you should know to be good at cybersecurity leadership. So this is really tailored towards people who want to lead, who want to be in abstract discussions about cybersecurity and hold their own, hopefully, better yet, persuade, convince, and, well, for lack of a better term, lead efficiently. So the first chapter in the section is about beginner level concepts, beginner at leadership, not necessarily beginner at engineering, because you still have to understand the technical foundations so you can get to this level anyway. So what are those beginner concepts? They're just things that you have to know so that you can have elementary discussions about cybersecurity from a leader's perspective. Then I have a chapter that is, you can guess, probably intermediate concepts. And I have a third chapter in the section which is about advanced concepts, things you need to claim the expert label, so to speak. I might even argue some people who claim that label don't know these concepts or use them in a fluffy way that's just focusing on the jargon, not really focusing on the value behind them. So if you really understand those concepts, my point is not to just put down random people on the internet, but rather to say, if you understand these concepts in detail, you're really taking big strides towards effective leadership and really being an expert who's valuable. So I call these chapters respectively elementary tooling, the beginner's belt. Then the next one is intermediate tooling, the professional's edge. And the third one is advanced tooling, the master's wisdom. So you might think that's a little bit cocky. I'm not super bothered by that. You can have that opinion. Just from experience saying that a lot of people who work in the field don't have these concepts down, and so I'm providing this pocket reference for you to always refer to it and always have an edge when you're having those discussions that need this level of understanding, which is, if you're in a leadership position, every day. So if you want to call it pretentious, I'm okay with that. I'd rather people call it pretentious, but other people have value out of it than just not deploy this knowledge anywhere, because I'm afraid of what people are going to think about me personally. I don't really care. I'm not creating a personal cult here. I'm just deploying some knowledge, putting it out there, again, spewing information, as this video at the beginning has said. So what are some of the concepts? Well, elementary things like the CIA triad, legal and regulatory compliance, standards, blah, blah. Those are like beginner level stuff to begin to understand cybersecurity strategy. But also some misunderstood concepts like, for example, business continuity planning, and a lot of terminology about it, how the process goes. Again, stuff that I see advanced people get wrong. So I put them in the book to make sure you understand the concept and you can apply it with value and effectiveness, not just on paper. some other slightly more advanced concepts, data security, vulnerability management. And you're going to say, oh, whoa, I've heard these terms a million times and I know what it means. Can you maybe try to define them with a few words? What is data security? What is vulnerability management? I think you will struggle with some details even if you're advanced. Even if you're an amazing engineer, super competent engineer, it's not a question of engineering. It's a question of understanding the concept at an abstract level that is fit for a leader. So this section, I would argue, is, again, less for engineers, more for leaders. Or to be more specific, it's for engineers aspiring to be good leaders because they're already good engineers and they want that next level because they know they deserve it. This is the path there. Understanding those concepts. Why are they important and what are they exactly? So it's not really about the textbook definition, but rather a practical and pragmatic deployment of those concepts in the real world, again, inspired by the title of the book. So then moving on to other more advanced concepts like security capabilities and other quality related concepts where security is kind of like a subcategory. So where do we sit in the bigger context, in the bigger ecosystem? And that's in chapter 11, which is more of advanced concepts rather than just for beginners or people aspiring to be leaders. It's for people who want to plug security into a bigger ecosystem and provide business value using security. So yeah, again, keeping up with the tradition, I'm gonna read a passage. The passage is from chapter 10, I believe, and gives you a little bit of insight into my writing style, but also I believe it's important to understand the value of the book and how many concepts are just quickly discussed in it very efficiently. Concepts that can be their own books sometimes, right? This is what I'm trying to point out in this section. So yeah, again, from chapter 10, let's get into it. Hello, Roland from the future here, the one writing chapters 9, 10, and 11 simultaneously. While writing a part of chapter 11 a few hours ago, I noticed that I'm discussing some concepts that could be their own book, as I mentioned verbally before. I then sifted through chapter 10 and I realized there are some other concepts that rise to the same level of importance and can really be discussed in much more length and detail than I could possibly manage in this book. I then thought of this intro and we have now caught up with the future, even if the future is yet to come, somewhere in the depths of chapter 11. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is this. Don't be discouraged. There's a lot to learn and a bunch of nebulous and complex concepts to wrap your head around. Excellence is truly hard and you should take it one day at a time and accept your intermediate results in the meantime. Much like our cybersecurity program, we are also infinite projects engaging in continuous improvement and we should invest in ourselves accordingly and sufficiently. Sentimental introductions aside, let's make a professional out of you. This chapter is all about the little bits of special knowledge and golden nuggets on many topics that will give you an advantage in the field. If you're aware of the concepts in this chapter and you understand both the terminology and the real-world applications of the concepts, then you are already way ahead of the average engineer and you can start thinking about transitioning into leadership and taking the reins of a cybersecurity program. So, leadership is hard in general and requires a lot of conceptual understanding. I'm not claiming I am the absolute best leader that ever graced any tech company. That's not the point I'm trying to make. I'm just trying to gather my lessons and my mistakes and my subsequent successes that I was able to get to by applying lessons that I got from the failures. And I'm trying to give them to you in a nice package. Again, a neat pocket reference, which is section 3 of this book. So yeah, that's about it. Thank you for watching. I hope the rambling was enjoyable. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn if you have any questions or you have any criticisms even. I post these or previews of these videos on LinkedIn. They're mostly for a YouTube audience, but if you want to find me on LinkedIn, I'll have a link in the description or somewhere in the comments. And if you're interested in the book, feel free to check it out on Amazon. I'll have links all over again. So yeah, again, thanks for your time. Take care and until the next one.